WLRN edition 114 in 3, 2, 1.
I was born woman, off my knees I will stand for my liberation. Sisters, rise again. I was born woman, off my knees I will stand for my liberation. Rise and rise again.
Greetings and welcome to the 114th edition podcast of Women's Liberation Radio News for this Thursday, October 2nd, 2025. This is Aurora Linnea, biological feminist and reality enthusiast. After spending last weekend in Indianapolis, where dozens of women from around the United States gathered for the annual WDI USA convention, I am pleased to report that our two guests for this month's show are state contacts for WDI USA. Stay tuned for my reflection on the convention coming soon to the WLRN blog. Our focus today is on men being housed with women in female jails and prisons, and why this is a problem, to say the least. We'll hear an interview that Thistle did with WDI USA state contacts for Illinois and Minnesota, Brianna and Elizabeth, about their work advocating for women who are housed with men in jails and prisons in their states. We'll also hear commentary on the topic from none other than the illustrious Sekhmet SheOwl, member of WLRN since 2016. The team at WLRN produces a monthly radio broadcast to break the sound barrier women are blocked by under the status quo rule of men. This blocking of women's discourse we see in all sectors of society, be they conservative, liberal, mainstream, progressive, or radical. The thread that runs through all of American politics, except for separatist feminism, is male dominance and entitlement in all spheres. To start off today's edition, here's Cat Bradfield with women's news from around the world for this Thursday, October 2nd, 2025. Take it away, Cat.
Thanks, Aurora. On September 8th, the body of missing teenager Celeste Rivas was found in an impounded car belonging to singer David. Celeste disappeared in April 2024, aged 13. It has been reported that Celeste's mother alleged her daughter was dating someone named David. It's also alleged that David and Celeste had matching finger tattoos reading, "Shh." David, who is allegedly cooperating with authorities in the investigation, released a song in 2022 titled Romantic Homicide, and in February this year, he released a music video for his song One More Dance, in which he hides a body in the trunk of a vehicle. Celeste's cause of death has not been identified, but police are investigating her death as a homicide. Women exposed to tear gas and other chemical weapons used by police to dispel recent protests against ICE and the war in Gaza have reported a range of ongoing health effects, including disrupted menstrual cycles and hormone imbalances. More than a dozen women across 3 protests reported symptoms such as abnormally painful cramps, weight gain, and late periods. This echoes the findings of a 2021 study of 900 women exposed to tear gas in Black Lives Matter protests who experienced similar effects. There is also anecdotal evidence from the Middle East linking tear gas exposure to miscarriage. Whilst the EPA has set advisory limits for tear gas exposure, no enforceable limit currently exists. A trans-identified male convicted of sexually assaulting his own 5-year-old daughter is currently being held in a women's prison in Victoria, Australia. The man, known as Autumn Harper, was sentenced to 4 years in prison for creating child abuse material and distributing it to his American partner in 2023. Harper was released on bail, and during his trial, a forensic psychiatrist denied he had a paraphilic disorder or sexual attraction to children. The case was not publicised in Australian media or police documents. Harper is currently being held at the Dame Phyllis Frost Correctional Centre, which has previously gained negative media attention for housing trans-identified males with female inmates. The policy of the state of Victoria is to house prisoners based on self-declared gender identity, regardless of medical intervention or the nature of their crimes. On September 15th, the Taliban began to cut off fibre-optic internet access connections in the northern provinces of Afghanistan, further isolating Afghan women and girls who had been reliant on online education after girls were banned from attending secondary school in 2021. There are fears that this is only the first step towards a total shutdown of internet access for the people of Afghanistan, with the Taliban allegedly considering cutting all broadband services as well as mobile data access. Since being barred from education, tens of thousands of Afghan girls and women have turned to online education, with the Online Women's University reporting it had enrolled 17,000 Afghan students across 15 subjects. This internet blackout not only cuts Afghan women off from education, but also prevents them from having any contact with the outside world. 2 women and a girl have been tortured and killed in Argentina by a group of suspected drug traffickers, who streamed the murders to a private social media group. Investigators believe the murders were retaliation for a package of cocaine stolen by one of the women, with the killers luring the victims to a house in Buenos Aires by promising them $300 in exchange for participation in a, quote, sex party, end quote. 2 men and 2 women have so far been arrested in relation to the murders. News of the horrific crime prompted relatives of the victims, feminists, and human rights organisations to organise protests across the country demanding justice. In South Korea, a woman convicted in 1964 for biting off the tongue of a man during an alleged sexual assault has been acquitted after 6 decades. Choi Ma-ya was 19 when she was attacked by a 21-year-old man and was able to break free by biting his tongue as he forced it into her mouth. She was given a 10-month sentence for grievous bodily harm, and her attacker sentenced to only 6 months for trespassing and intimidation. Choi filed for retrial in 2020, which was initially rejected. In 2024, her campaigning finally succeeded and a retrial was ordered. At the first hearing of the retrial, the prosecutors apologised to Choi and asked the court to overturn her conviction. Choi's lawyers say she intends to seek compensation from the state for damages from the initial conviction. On September 22nd, US President Donald Trump alleged that pregnant women taking the drug Tylenol would increase the risk of the child developing autism. There is no evidence supporting this claim, which further contributes to the many pieces of misinformation and poorly researched claims around pregnancy and contraception currently circulating in the US. A Maori women's rights advocate in New Zealand is facing prison time after being reported to police by a trans-identified male for her social media posts. Rex Landy is a member of Mana Wahine Korero, a group formed in opposition to the encroachment of Western social justice ideologies on Maori culture. The group's name translates to Sovereign Women Speak. Landy was the subject of a complaint filed to police by trans-identified male fantasy author Daniel Johnston in 2022 and was instructed by police to refer to him as a woman. In 2024, Landy received a court order instructing her to remove all posts she had made directly or indirectly referencing Johnston. In December 2024, police raided Landy's house and arrested her. She will appear in court again in December 2025 and faces 3 months in jail or a $50,000 fine. After a week of protests and unrest and the dissolution of its previous government, Nepal appointed its first female Prime Minister on September 12th. Sushila Kaki, formerly the Chief Justice of Nepal, was nominated by the Gen Z protesters who brought down the former government earlier in the week. The protest and dissolution was in response to a social media ban, as well as ongoing corruption and nepotism in the Nepalese government. Kaki was appointed as Chief Justice in 2016 and delivered several judgments against senior police and ministers in high-profile corruption cases. After her retirement, she continued to speak out against injustice and political corruption, including condemning the use of lethal force against the protesters. That concludes WLRN's World News segment for this Thursday, October 2nd. I'm Cat Bradfield. Share your news stories, announcements, and tips with us by emailing info@wlrnmedia.com and letting us know what's going on.
This is Joe Brew, and you are listening to WLRN.
Hasn't
That was Jamie Wyatt with her song Wishing Well. The song is featured on her autobiographical album Felony Blues, which started as a project about the 8 months she spent in LA County Jail. Next up, we'll hear an interview Thistle did with WDI USA state contacts Brianna and Elizabeth from Illinois and Minnesota. They talk about how they got involved with WDI USA and what got them interested in helping stop the pipeline of men being sent to women's jails and prisons. Take a listen.
All right, welcome to another edition of WLRN. This month we're talking about women in prison and how men are being housed with women in prison. And I have two guests with me, both activists with WDI USA. And I'm just going to ask them to please introduce themselves. So welcome, Brianna. Why don't you go first?
Hi, I'm Brianna Pressley. I'm the Illinois state contact for WDI USA. I'm also a member of the web team, the volunteer coordination team, and the anti-pornography working group.
Lots of roles. Awesome. And go ahead, Elizabeth.
Yeah, so my name is Elizabeth Watson. I'm the Minnesota state contact for WDI. I've recently just joined the anti-pornography working group and have just been working on the prison project as well as my state legislative monitoring.
Yeah, you two ladies are busy and it's all volunteer work, right?
Yes, it's all volunteer.
Well, thank you so much for your activism and for advocating for girls and women. You are both state contacts for Midwestern states. Brianna, you are the state contact for Illinois, and Elizabeth, you're the state contact for Minnesota. And both of you have been working on men being housed with women in prison. And specifically, you've been working, Brianna, I think you started working first on this issue. And you've been working with women who have experiences on the inside with men being housed with them. Can you talk about how you met those women, how you found them, and what? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so every state has an inmate roster. So in Illinois, you just have to do an internet search. So in Illinois, it's individuals in custody search. That's what it's called. But you can search like in any other state, just put in your state name and then inmate search. And then you'll have a search bar. For Illinois, it lets you search by last name, date of birth, or inmate number. Now, I had nothing. So I just said, what's a common last name? I searched my own last name. And then I just scrolled through the names and I looked for a female's name. So I found Sarah Smith, for example. That's not a real name, but I clicked on Sarah's profile, and for Illinois, you can see a picture so that you have picture verification. I was curious and looked up my neighboring state of Iowa, and Iowa's is very similar, but they don't have pictures, so you can't tell if Sarah is actually a woman. But thankfully in Illinois, we do see pictures. So I reached out to a handful of women, 4 women at first, and I
electronically?
No, I had to write to them. So I found their names electronically on the internet. Exactly. Yeah, I wrote them handwritten letters. I reached out to four women initially. And in the letter, I explained, this is my name. I live in Bloomington, Illinois. The reason I'm writing to you is because I learned about a man from Bloomington who raped his 2 children, and now he's being held at Logan. Logan is our women's prison. And so I only wrote to women that were in Logan. We have a couple different prisons that house women, Decatur and Logan in Lincoln, Illinois. But I didn't write to any women in Decatur because I couldn't verify that. Well, I think that prison houses men and women. Now Logan does too, but it's ostensibly a women's only prison, but there are at least a dozen men who have been housed there. And so I just reached out to these women. I told them who I was and why I was writing. And I just asked them in plain language to tell me about their experiences of being housed in a women's prison amongst men who are there based on their gender identity. And I said, I understand if you don't feel comfortable responding to me, but if that's the case, please share my letter with another woman who might want to respond. And then of those 4 women, 2 of them responded. But then I got just a ton of other women sending me letters for the following months after that. So I sent my first letter in March, and I sent them all around the same time. So at the end of March, and then this is September when we're recording this. So at this point, I've received letters from 31 women, and some of them continue to write. So I have a few pen pals at this point. And then others, I should be clear, I have responded to every single letter I've received. But after that first response, you may or may not hear back. So some of them continue to write me and others don't. A few of them I have since transferred from written communication to text messages. So in Illinois, we use core links. I know Elizabeth has to use JPay to communicate via text in Minnesota, but we use core links in Illinois.
And what is the goal of contacting these women in prison?
My goal, I think, was just to inform myself so that I can inform others. So when people ask me, this can't actually be happening, this isn't, they aren't really housing men with penises in women's prisons. And I say, well, I have these letters that state that not only are they being housed there, but that they're also flashing women, and they're also getting privileges that the women themselves don't receive. Like they're able to buy extra items with their commissary. I just wanted to inform myself so that I could have firsthand information from the women that are experiencing this, so that when I'm talking to others, I can inform them as well.
As well, the other thing is, as a group, one of the projects that we worked on with WDI was we were trying to figure out the number of male prisoners being housed in women's prisoners throughout the country. And we sent FOIA requests to, I think we got all of the states. One person, I think Brianna, actually focused on the federal prisons, and then we split it up. We each sent requests to a certain number of states. And most of the states that are housing men in women's prisons are really reluctant to give answer. We asked 2 questions. How many men are in your women's prisons, and what are the crimes? That's the first question we start with. And then if we can get a number, we ask, what are the crimes that they were convicted of? And a lot of these states won't give us the answers to those questions, and they have interesting ways of dodging the questions. Sometimes it's kind of, ridiculously high fees for the information. Sometimes it's saying that they don't track the specific information that we're requesting, because FOIA laws don't require them to create a new category of information or to track information that they're not tracking already. So they kind of got around answering those questions. So when we reached out to the women, it was kind of, like Brianna said, it was to inform ourselves. I think it was also on my end, I very much wanted to kind of let these women know, because I imagine that they felt very forgotten about and very much like, nobody cares in society. And I just wanted them to know that there were, people on the outside who did see, or who do see what's happening, and who are concerned about it. And then part of it was to just kind of get a feel for what their experiences are, what they're going through. So I think it was kind of a combination of all of the above for me. And Brianna kind of set the tone for this. She started and had such good success with the women she reached out to. So I kind of followed her lead and did the same thing. I looked up some inmates in Minnesota's inmate registry. We also have their photographs available, so I could make sure that I was writing to actual women. I was lucky in the sense that both my local news outlet, which is Alpha News, and then Redux magazine had done a couple of articles on 2 different women in our so we have one state women's prison, Shakopee, in Minnesota, and 2 different women had reached out and spoken to journalists. And so when I started reaching out to women, I started with those 2 women who had been listed in those articles. And then I looked up, I think, 4 other women. So I started by writing to 6 women, and I only heard back from 2. But then one of those women told me to use the electronic system, which in Minnesota is JPay. And then she started putting me into contact with other women. She would tell me the name of a woman who wanted to speak to me, and she would tell me that to add that woman, and she'd give me their inmate number if she could. Otherwise, I would go look that up, search them up, and add them. And I'm in contact with 9, so not quite as many as Brianna. Some of them only write to me when it's concerning a man in the prison, and some of them have started writing to me about other issues as well. Brianna and I have talked about it. Some of the women have concerns about like the conditions in the prison. Some of them have concerns about medical care that they don't feel that they're getting. So, I've done everything from searched up the names and contact information of attorneys to try to, help them file a complaint with the Department of Health for like concerns about black mold, to getting them in touch with journalists specifically about the men that are in there. So
So what started out as focusing on men being housed with them is general advocacy work, that because there are all kinds of issues that women in prison are facing, I'm sure. What are some of the commonalities in the stories that you're hearing?
I've started hearing from women about their concerns with the other women that are being housed with them that are on testosterone. So they say, you're asking me about the men and how the men are being violent towards us. And yes, that's happening. But are you aware of the studs that are also here, that are aggressive, that are both sexually and physically aggressive towards us? And I didn't even think to ask, but multiple women have brought that up to me. And then I had 2 women also bring up black mold at Logan. So like Elizabeth, at first I brought it up with the prison. I mentioned that to the prison and said, are you aware of this public health hazard? And they responded and said, thanks for bringing this to our attention, but the women themselves have to submit a formal complaint. And I went back and forth with them about, I don't care about your procedures. There may be reasons that they can't do that. Right now, I'm informing you of a public health concern, and it just didn't go anywhere. So I ended up reaching out to the Illinois Department of Public Health for that. And then when they didn't get back to me, I also even ended up contacting the ACLU of Illinois, because, hey, they might as well help us with something. So I mentioned the black mold issue, but they didn't respond either. But the point is that I want to be able to write the women back and let them know. And in fact, I did. I said, they're telling me you need to submit this complaint yourself so that we can have a complaint number and everybody can follow up with that specific complaint number. But I want you to also know that I brought it to their attention. I also contacted the Illinois Department of Public Health. I also contacted the ACLU. I just want them to know someone is out here fighting for them in whatever capacity.
Love you. They must really appreciate this attention and work that you're doing, since, like you said, they feel forgotten and like nobody really cares. So what kind of code of ethics are you employing as you work with this vulnerable population?
So I think that's been one thing. We have kind of gone into this with basically just some general ideas of, some goals in mind, of information we would like to have, how we would like to use that information. But we kind of learned along the way, set up a post office box, right? Just for your own personal, you don't know exactly who you're going to be in contact with and who's going to get a hold of your contact information. So using a post office box is a really good idea. I personally have decided I'm not going to discuss or offer or give any money to any, like I send the women that I'm in contact with stamps so they can easily correspond with me. On our electronic system, they still use stamps. So I purchase some stamps on there and send the women stamps as they use them. And I have no problem with that. You have to just know what your boundaries are going to be, like what information you're willing to share about yourself, if you're going to give them money or not. And I know some people might want to do that, and that's okay. I personally just decided that's not something I'm going to do at this point. And then I just try to, like, I never tell them that I can do something if I'm not sure, because we are, I think, fairly new to all of this. I don't want to make any promises. So like if they reach out to me on anything other than, the gender issue, the men in the prisons, I tell them, I'll do the best I can. I'll look into it. For example, I had a woman talk to me about black mold. And just like Brianna and her experience in Illinois, Minnesota also told me the women need to file their own complaint. It's empowering to them, is what the state says. And I understand that train of thought, but it's also, it's difficult. They have, the internet that they have access to is limited. I don't think they can do just a search without, some kind of supervision. One of the women has told me that she's tried to file reports, specifically PREA reports, and she's afraid that they've gone missing, and she's not sure if the warden is actually filing them. It's hard because, you want to follow the rules, and you need to follow the rules, and you don't want to get entangled into any like unhealthy situation. But it's also frustrating because there's bureaucracy in dealing, because it's a government entity essentially. So I think setting your boundaries, knowing how much you can do. And then I think the last thing I've done is I've asked the women, if I have shared any of the information that they've shared with me. I've made sure I've gotten their permission. Is this something I can share a screenshot of? Or, are you willing to talk to a reporter? Do you want me to try to get you in touch with a journalist? And just making sure that I have, permit, and that I outline what I can do, and then that I have their permission to do those things. That's kind of been my standard of operating. Mm-hmm. What do you think, Brianna?
Yeah, I completely agree. As soon as I started growing my list of the men in that prison, at Logan, I I immediately sent my growing list to Redux, because I want them to do more articles like they've been doing. They've been so great. That's how I learned about the pervert in Bloomington who's being housed at the women's prison after raping his kids. Before she asked, can I have some of the names of these women? And I said, I don't want to just give you their names. So I went back and just asked them first for permission. So that took weeks because we're still snail mailing. And I felt really bad, but at the same time, I'm not going to just, yes, you're interacting with me. I don't know if I'm just going to throw your name out there to some journalist. And they, I wanted the women's approval before doing that. And another thing I would say is just, for me personally, even when the women wrote back and didn't share my feelings, like some of them are sympathetic towards the men. They say, yeah, we don't like the men here. We don't like them being housed with us, but where are they supposed to go? And I've made a lot of good friends, and we play cards every week. And it's like, so they have nothing bad to say about the men. And me personally, I don't want to ignore any letters. So I write them back and say, I'm really glad that the men in your company aren't giving you any trouble, and I hope it stays that way. And thanks for writing to me. And that I leave it at that. And I did make the mistake of sending money to the first handful of women. So I continued every single letter I got. I just was sending them, each woman, the same amount of money, not a lot, but $15 a piece, because I was confused about the process, and I thought that they would need that in order to buy paper, buy pens, buy stamps in order to communicate with me. But it turns out that that's not the case. They have their own ways of getting money, so don't even start there. Don't even bother. Like do what Elizabeth did by not sending any of the women money unless you want to. But if you send one of them money, just know you're going to have to send every single one money. So that's kind of the boat that I'm in, and I'm okay with that. But that's where I'm stuck. So I would recommend not starting with that. Go ahead.
They all know each other and they talk to each other,
Oh, of
right?
course. Oh, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. And is there a larger goal with this project? I imagine that these stories there's a lot that they have a lot in common, and that maybe some kind of lawsuit could be filed using these stories. Can you talk about that?
I would love to file a lawsuit. Yeah, go ahead, Elizabeth.
Well, I was just going to say, ultimately that would be up to the women, and I think well outside of, my ability or scope to, say whether that's something that they should do or, would be successful in. I would love to see every woman who's incarcerated with men file a lawsuit. And it's my personal opinion that they should be able to. And you would think that they would win. But I'm not a lawyer, and so I can't speak to that, right? If we can empower the women, I think, to know that there's people that care, know that, the situation that they're in is not okay. I know a couple of the women that I'm speaking to have talked about a lawsuit. One woman was actually going to be released this month, and she was pretty adamant that she was going to find an attorney when she got out of here. I think I might have sent her a couple of names of attorneys. So, that would be wonderful. But ultimately, that's again outside of my control. My goal is to, again, let them know that there are people who care, to empower them. But kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier with some of the stories that we're hearing, I want the public to know what women are going through. And of course, when there's an assault, obviously that captures everybody's attention, as it should, because that shouldn't be happening. But some of the things that the women are telling us, or at least me, I think is really hard for them and troublesome. And I don't think the public understands, exactly what it's putting them through. So several of the women that I'm in contact with have said they have past experiences of trauma, and they're in prison trying to get their lives together, trying to turn their lives around. Many of them have said that. And so it's re-traumatizing to them to have these men in the prisons in the first place. But some of the things that they have in place to keep the women on the right track are being kind of turned upside down because of the men. For example, the women have the opportunity to earn themselves a single cell where they don't have a cellmate, and they're kind of their own private room. But there's a lot of criteria they have to meet. So they have to be, on good behavior with no what they call SEG, or segregation, so no behavioral demerits or whatever, for a year before they can even qualify for those rooms. And at least two of the women have said that they have been kicked out of their single rooms that they, had to work towards getting, because when these men are being placed in the prison, they are putting the men into the single rooms. So the women who have worked really hard, again, in their own words, to turn their lives around, one of those motivating factors is being taken away from them. So they're being displaced out of their own cells. So to bring that back to the question you just asked about, what the ultimate goal is, I have to think about what I have the ability to make happen. And that's really just trying to make people aware, and maybe somebody who does have the ability to, help these women file a lawsuit or really get their stories out there. maybe they get in touch with the women and, so like if I can start that process and then get them to the next step, I think that's kind of my goal, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. What do you think motivates the prison to place the men into these single cells? Is it because they want to protect the women from these men, or is it because they want to give these men a privilege, a reward or something because they're even more oppressed than regular women? Or
I'm honestly, it's a great question. I really don't know the answer to that. You could look at it as maybe it's for the best because then they're not being placed into cells with the women.
directly
So,
with women, yeah.
so maybe that is good, but at the same time, why can't the men be placed into cells with each other? As far as we know, there's 5 men, so why can't they be placed into cells with each other? Why do the women have to be displaced? So,
Yeah, in Illinois, I know several of the women have told me, yeah, even though the men are housed in a separate unit, they still shower with us. So it's like, what is the point of allowing, even though they have their own showers, they still are allowed somehow to shower with the women.
it sounds like that's what's going on here too, is the female inmates are being forced to shower with the men. And I know that there was concerns that some of the male prisoners were being given special treatment here that the women aren't given, makeup, cosmetic products that the women don't have access to, but for the men it's gender affirming. And I don't know all of the products, but I think it's, a little bit racier bras, some cosmetics, some hair products, just things that the women aren't allowed to have. So I don't know if the cell is, just one more benefit for this quote unquote marginalized group, or if it's in a way to protect the women. I'm just not sure.
The fact that the trans identity is what gets you these extra privileges, more time out of your cell, whether you're male or female. If you have a trans identity, you are allowed more time out of your cell. At least that's what I'm being told about what's going on in Illinois. You're allowed to buy those extra items with your commissary. So one of the women actually told me that if that item, like let's say a scented lotion, is gifted from one of the men to one of the female inmates and she's caught with it, that's considered contraband. And so she is punished for having it. Whereas the men can buy it with their commissary. Oh, and they get to shop more often. So the women, for some reason, I don't understand how commissary works, but apparently the women get to shop once a month. The men are allowed, for some reason, to shop more often than that. I don't understand all these extra privileges. I mean, I get the more time out of their cell. I know that the women probably don't know this, but I'm sure that the men are getting appointments to go dilate, the ones that have had the surgery.
Right.
Yeah. And they talk about how the women go on Wednesdays for their testosterone. So the female inmates are kind of privy to some of what's going on, but they don't know all of it. So we're just kind of getting bits and pieces of information from them.
So in the name of gender affirmative care, these men are given privileges that the women are not, unless they're trans identified women who are getting their gender affirmative care. So all around, if you identify as trans, you're going to be getting more privileges.
Correct.
Not fair. Elizabeth, can you tell us the story? You wrote an email a while back when we were corresponding about this, about how you managed to influence a local reporter in one of the topics that she covered that was related to this issue.
Well, we do. So we have a local reporter here. I don't know that I've influenced her at all, but she has written a couple. So she's written a couple articles about a couple of the women in Shakopee. And that's where I got the 2 names that I originally wrote to. One of the women, and I wonder, this might be the story that you're thinking of. One of the women that she wrote about, I believe that Redux also wrote about her as well. And that got posted on X, and it kind of went viral. And J.K. Rowling shared that post. And at that point, I was in contact with the woman that story was about. So I wrote to her. I tried to send her a copy of the of the tweet, a screenshot, a picture of the tweet from J.K. Rowling, just saying, hey, and I basically just told her, women all over the world are seeing your story. This went viral. J.K. Rowling, tweeted this. And the way that the prison email system is set up, any links or anything that you send, they essentially remove it, right? It's all kind of contraband. So I don't know how much of that she was able to see, but she did write me back, and she was so excited that it had been shared by J.K. Rowling and that women were seeing it. And she was so appreciative that
that must have made her feel very heard and seen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was, I could tell, like, it just her letter in response to that was, she was full of just love and appreciation. So, even just that little piece right there, it's like, it gives them hope. And I think it lets them know that, like, when they can see that somebody like J.K. Rowling is paying attention to what they're going through, to their stories, that gives them hope, and that makes them know that, they're not crazy, they're not alone, and that, what they're going through is wrong, and people do see it.
And it's rewarding for you too, as a volunteer, to see that you're able to make that connection and let them know that J.K. Rowling is paying attention. So that must be a really good feeling for you as well, which leads me to this final question, which is, if our listeners wanted to get involved with this important work, what would you recommend they do?
I would recommend that they go find their inmate roster for their state and start there. Like I said, you want to tell them in your letter how you chose their name. So I just specifically said, hey, I picked you because you have a female name, and that's how I found you in the list of Smiths. And that's, I just chose a common last name, and that's how I found you. And this is who I am. This is where I live. So they want to know that you're local. You're not, writing to an Illinois prison from California, for example. So let them know that you're from that state, and that the reason you're writing. If you're not writing because even if you don't care about men and women's prisons, just tell them why you're writing and ask for a response. I do want to say, be prepared to have a pen pal or two, just in case. So if you aren't prepared for some serious back and forth, then maybe don't write to a lot of women at first. Take it slow. Make sure you've got a PO box ahead of time so that you're all set up. But if, like I said, I reached out to 4 initially, and then within a matter of 2 months, maybe, I had a couple dozen of letters. So pace yourself and just take it slow. There's no reason to rush it. But ask specific questions, and yeah, I think that's really all I can think of.
Okay. Thank you so much for joining me this evening and sharing your stories with WLRN listeners, and for doing this amazing, important work. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we sign off?
I'll just add to what Brianna was just saying. Something like this as a volunteer project might feel overwhelming for people to take on by themselves, and it can be. So I would just also throw out there that if women are looking to volunteer and aren't sure exactly how to go about it or what to do, head on over to Women's Declaration, and if you're not a signatory, sign the declaration and fill out a volunteer application. It's super quick, and I love volunteering for WDI. It's it's you meet some great people, you learn a lot, and you kind of get to see how things work, on the behind the scenes, with, monitoring legislation and planning actions and things like that. And so there's a whole network of volunteers all over the country. And so I would just tell women, if that feels like something that is more manageable, we are always looking for and love to have more volunteers. So,
and we meet every Sunday. So you can come to these meetings on Sundays and just listen to other women's ideas. You can bring your own ideas. You can start from scratch and just apply to become a volunteer with us.
Those are Zoom meetings on Sundays?
That's right. Yeah.
Yep.
For all the volunteers, for all the different jobs that people are doing?
Correct.
Yep. So
how many women show up to those Sunday night meetings? I assume they're Sunday evenings.
Yeah, it varies.
It varies week to week. There's other groups that are having meetings as well. And then once a month we have like our state contact meetings. So I think it varies, and with what's going on in people's lives, but it's a pretty steady, I think, core group. And then, here and there more people. And and, this year, I will just say this, the focus of the convention this year is growing the women's liberation movement. So, part of what we want to be doing this year is networking and reaching more women and, just trying to bring more women in. And so I would just say volunteering. I know volunteering sounds very overwhelming. I was very nervous about it at first myself, but it's really not. It's not difficult. You're not alone. It's a great group of women, and you can work with groups, so you're not really stuck doing something you're not sure how to do. So it's a good deal.
Wonderful. Well, thanks again for joining me this evening, and thanks to our listeners for staying tuned to WLRN.
Since 2016,
empowering women to be the media and reclaim the narrative.
Your grassroots community radio station.
By women, for women.
WLRN.
WLRN.
Trans-identified men being transferred to women's prisons is one of those subjects that enrages me to the point that I try not to think about it for more than a few minutes. Of all the ways the transgender cult has changed female reality in the Western world, this is one of the worst, one of the most horrific, and I will never run out of anger about it. If the liberals and leftists responsible for this practice were capable of guilt or empathy for women, it might be worth talking to them about it, but they aren't. So the feminist conversation about trans-identified males in women's prisons serves to remind us just how misogynistic the transgender movement is, how misogynistic the political left is, and how male violence and sexual predation ought to be the primary focus of the feminist movement. The fact that prisons have always been sex segregated in the US and many other countries is not arbitrary. Society has always recognized that women wouldn't be safe in prisons with men, and we used to collectively care about that. Female and male convicts are not comparable. The overwhelming majority of violent crimes are committed by men, including rape and other sex crimes, while most women in prison are non-violent offenders. As hard as it is for prison staff to control male inmates in medium and maximum security prisons, how much harder would it be for them to stop those same men from attacking, raping, and even killing women if prisons were co-ed? Female inmates across the United States have been raped and attacked by heterosexual men transferred into their prisons. Most of these men did not begin to claim transgender identity until after they entered prison and after transgenderism hit mainstream culture within the last 15 years. Most, if not all, of these men are doing time for violent crimes, including sexual crimes and murder. They are not being held in solitary confinement at the women's prisons. They're given unrestricted access to the women, regardless of any physical and sexual abuse convictions on their rap sheet. When they attack female inmates, they are usually not sent back to a men's prison, and to my knowledge, they do not face additional charges and therefore additional punishment. It bears mentioning that the rate of past sexual trauma, physical abuse, and psychological trauma in the female prison population is staggeringly high, much higher than in the general female population. These are women who enter the prison system already terrorized, traumatized, sexually abused, physically and mentally abused, some of them serving sentences for killing their male abusers. They are literally among the most vulnerable human beings in society, in the same boat as prostituted women, homeless women and children, and kids in the foster care system. These women show up to prison with drug and alcohol addictions and untreated PTSD because of what males have done to them. In many cases, they never would have ended up in prison at all had they not experienced the trauma, the abuse, the male violence that they did. The U.S. Constitution prohibits the use of cruel and unusual punishment in the Eighth Amendment. Since that amendment was ratified, it has been executed and further defined as a blanket prohibition of torture and, in some cases, the death penalty for convicted felons. The clause is founded on the general idea that even criminals, including violent criminals, are entitled to a certain degree of physical and psychological safety during their time in prison. We as a society agreed that inmates shouldn't be subjected to punishment, quote, degrading to human dignity, unquote. Yet here we are, allowing female inmates to be raped, beaten, and psychologically terrorized by some of the most violent and dangerous men in the country because some people insist that those men are actually women if they say so. If rape is not a form of cruel and unusual punishment, why isn't it legally on the table as a sentencing option within the criminal court system? And if it is still considered a form of cruel and unusual punishment by the overwhelming majority of legislators, judges, corrections officers, and civilians, why isn't anyone arguing within the judicial system that putting these trans-identified, heterosexual men into women's prisons is unconstitutional? In preparation for this commentary, I listened to episode 77 of the Red Femme podcast. The hosts, Hannah Borelli and Dr. Jen Isaacson, made a point that I myself wanted to address. The hypocrisy and apparent cognitive dissonance of liberals and leftists who claim to support prison abolition, partially on the grounds that imprisonment is inhumane, but who then turn around and unequivocally defend trans-identified males in women's prisons. Why is it that liberals and leftists can recognize rape as a method of torture when Israelis do it to Palestinians, or when American military men do it to prisoners in Guantanamo Bay, but not when men who claim to be women do it to actual women in domestic prisons? It does, on the surface, seem like a contradiction. These people who claim to be so concerned about the prison system's treatment of inmates, the government's use of prisons to exploit and abuse inmates, and who argue for the concept of restorative justice as a replacement for the dehumanizing prison experience, not only accepting violent male offenders in women's prisons, but enthusiastically arguing in favor of it. While there may be some genuine denial of the fact that trans-identified men are raping and tormenting female inmates, I think it's equally true that these liberals and leftists simply don't care that it happens. Their supposed compassion for convicts is reserved for male convicts. Their interest in abolishing prisons is fundamentally motivated not by a naive idealism and the moral unwillingness to cage human beings, but by the sinister desire to live in a world where men specifically can do whatever they want to other people without consequence. Liberals and leftists will, of course, vehemently deny that they want this, but we have no reason not to believe the men specifically do. We already know that liberal and leftist men are equally as misogynistic, violent, and sexually predatory as right-wing men. They are no less likely to end up in prison for sexual crimes against women than right-wing men are. Is it really so outlandish to think that as long as prisons exist, these men not only don't care if women get raped by men inside of them, but on some level take a perverse pleasure in knowing that's happening? It's been obvious all along that the men on the left who aggressively defend the trans movement enjoy both watching trans-identified males violate female boundaries and spaces and helping them do it. We have at least a decade's worth of examples of these men threatening women who don't submit to the trans agenda with rape or laughing at those women being threatened and attacked by other men. Whether within or outside the trans debate, liberal and leftist men have made it clear that just like their right-wing brothers, they only pretend to care about the welfare of women who obey them, serve them, and further their political agenda. Which is to say, they don't care about women as people at all. When they're not arguing for prison abolition and the right of male convicts who suddenly decide they're women to be validated in their identity, liberals and leftists often deflect from the issue of trans-identified males raping, beating, and harassing female inmates with the point that those women are already being raped and abused by male prison staff. As if that somehow justifies or diminishes the impact of the trans-identified males, posers, and genuine articles alike who rape and abuse the women. Recognize that this is not an argument. It's a cop-out, a feeble attempt at escaping the conversation, a red herring. It's also an incredibly outrageous response for these people to offer when you stop and think about it. Women are already being raped and abused by men in prison, so therefore nobody should complain if it happens to them more? How can you claim to be the side who cares about dismantling patriarchy and protecting women's rights when that's your stance? The same people who whine about feeling unsafe in the mere presence of anyone who politically disagrees with them, including feminist women who have never committed actual physical or sexual violence in their lives, don't care about imprisoned women feeling or being literally unsafe. Most of them will never know what it's like to be trapped in a room, a prison, with a known male rapist and murderer with no means of self-defense. Unsafe is a concept to them, an unsubstantiated feeling, never a physical reality. They consider women being actually unsafe, physically, sexually, mentally unsafe, and either deny that it's a reality altogether, or argue that those women's sexual and psychological torture is a fair price for them to pay in order to uphold gender ideology. Of all the ways the political left has betrayed women in recent years, this is one of the most disgusting, one of the most unforgivable, one of the most infuriating. And it shows us exactly who these people, who these men in particular, are. The prison situation is not the only context in which trans-identified men commit violence against women and girls, but it is the context in which the female victims are the most helpless. If you're a feminist or anti-transgender activist, this part of the trans movement should be at the top of your political priority list. More important than public bathrooms, women's sports, and even the transing of children. all of the consequences to women and children inflicted by the trans cult matter, but women getting raped by trans-identified men in prison is, along with all other female experiences of rape and male sexual violence, the most urgent, the most dire. Those women alone should motivate us all to keep resisting the transgender movement and anyone who supports it. Those women need us. Don't allow the world to forget them.
That was none other than our illustrious desert dweller, Ms. Sekhmet SheOwl, with her commentary on today's topic. Thank you, Sekhmet. And thank you, dear listeners, for tuning in to WLRN's 114th edition podcast on males in women's jails. WLRN would like to thank our guests this month for sharing their views. Thank you so much, Brianna and Elizabeth, for speaking with me. Until next time, this is Thistle signing off on another WLRN podcast.
For WLRN's edition 114, I collaged some images from jails, using layering and distressing to push the colors and sense of place. On the left side, a hand grasps one of many bars. On the right side, in a jail cell with bunks, is a white silhouette of a woman reading a book. Watching the woman from the center is a male inmate with a woman's hairstyle. I scribbled over the man since he didn't belong there, resulting in him having a green and blue face, and I drew a red circle with a diagonal line over his face. The red circle symbol was created in 1931 as a universal symbol of no, representing something that is not allowed. The result emphasizes the predatory sense of men who demand to be housed with women, as women serve their time in a system that ignores their safety. This is Margaret. Thanks for listening.
And I'm Aurora. Thank you for tuning in. Next month, we'll be focusing our program on a review of our trip to the UK for the Philia Conference and a release party for Sheila Jeffrey's new book, Uprooting Male Domination. Our handcrafted podcasts always come out on the first Thursday of the month, so look for it on Thursday, November 6th. If you'd like to receive our newsletter to notify you when each podcast, music show, and interview is released, please sign up for the newsletter on the WLRN WordPress site. Stay strong in the struggle, and thank you for listening.
This is Anne signing off on another edition of WLRN's monthly handcrafted podcast. You can find us on X, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, SoundCloud, in addition to our website. Our monthly podcasts are always crafted with tender, loving care and in solidarity with women worldwide. Thanks for your support. We would love to hear from you, so please share, like, and comment widely.
But how will we find our way out of this? What is the antidote for the patriarchal kiss? How will we find what needs to be shown? And then after that, where is home? Tell me, where is my home? 'Cause gender